Everyone, welcome to this meeting. By the way, I've got a long read now, so settle in. Yeah. Welcome to this meeting of the Budget and Resources Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Leo Montague, Chair of the committee. Members of the committee and officers are present here at Civic, and I will ask everyone to introduce themselves shortly. We have not received any requests from the public to speak at this evening's meeting. Committee meetings such as this are generally no longer being live streamed. This evening's meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Council's YouTube channel as soon as possible after the meeting. Please do speak clearly and into the microphone so you are audible in the recording. We are not expecting a fire alarm test this evening, so in the event that the alarm sounds, please exit the building by the nearest marked exit and assemble outside as indicated by officers. Before we start, I will propose that the public and press are excluded in accordance with paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 for any discussions relating to the exempt minutes for item 4 on the agenda this evening. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Nigel. Are we agreed? Thank you. Additionally, item 7 includes a schedule of the director identified savings. Whilst the schedule itself is not private, several of the savings relating to staffing may need to be discussed in private session, especially if the nature of the questions cover specific detail relating to individual posts, departmental structures, or commercially sensitive information. If this is the case, we may need to ask the committee to resolve to hold those discussions in an exempt session. Can I please ask that if councillors are in any doubt about whether their question might stray into matters that are likely to be exempt, they seek advice prior. If we do have to resolve to exclude the public and press, the recording will be reviewed and as much of the discussion and debate as possible will be made available to the public. Now I will ask those present to briefly introduce themselves, starting on my left and going round in a nice circle.
Thank you, Chair. Sian Lloyd, Senior Governance and Scrutiny Officer.
Peace Geary, Councillor for the only ward and Vice Chair of the committee.
Councillor Khan, member of this committee.
Councillor Saskia Soden and a member of this committee.
Steve Richardson, Director of Finance.
Good evening, Anna Rolton, Assistant Director of Finance.
Vicky Errington, Senior Finance Manager.
Sonia Hattle, Head of Finance.
Good evening, Councillor Nigel Long, Bletchley Park Ward, member of this committee.
Councillor Andy Carr, member of this committee.
Councillor Peter Cannon, member for Shelley-Brook End Ward and Vice Chair of this committee.
Thank you very much. Item 2, apologies. Do we have any apologies, Sian?
No apologies for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you very much. Item 3, disclosures of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Members and officers to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registerable interests or non-registerable interests they may have in the business to be transacted, and officers to disclose any interests they may have in any contract to be considered. None. Thank you. Item 4, we have the public and private minutes to approve for the meetings held on the 17th of December 2025. Are the public minutes agreed? Agreed. Do any councillors wish to speak about the private minutes? No. Are the private minutes agreed? Thank you. Item 5 is the Budget and Resources Scrutiny Committee Recommendations and Action Tracker. Do any officers want to comment on the action tracker? Do any members of the committee have any contributions they want to make on this item? No. In that case, I propose that we receive and note the updated recommendations of the action tracker and information relating to outcomes agreed at previous meetings. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 6, our first item of business tonight is a presentation on the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement 2026-27. Steve, would you like to present this item for us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're just going to take you through a slide presentation just to give you an update on the local government finance settlement. I stress this is a provisional settlement. I'll come back to that in just a moment. And we're also just going to give a little update of where things have progressed since the draft budget report was published last year in terms of savings, which is obviously the second item on your agenda this evening. So on this first slide are some headlines. So the local government provisional settlement was published on the 17th of December after we'd actually published the draft budget, so the timing wasn't quite as we'd have liked. It was a 3-year settlement as expected. Years 2 and 3 are to be regarded as minimum allocations, so that it may or may not change in future years. But although it's a 3-year settlement, we will still get an annual settlement every year, irrespective of that. It's just we've been given effectively indicative allocations for 2 further years. In terms of the overall funding nationally, core spending power, which is the measure the government choose to use, and it's the measure the previous government also used, which looks at most of the grants that we receive from central government and council tax income that we're able to raise locally, is government's measure of core spending power. Of all the increased funding coming into the system, 74% of the increase to core spending power is to be generated through assumed increases to council tax. Therefore, only 26% of the funding increase is from grant. So there's an increasing reliance, as you will see as we go through these slides, on council tax increases to fund local services. Over the 3 years as a whole, the total amount of grant increase is 3.1 billion. And you can see in the brackets there, the split over the 3 years. And the thing probably to notice about that is that most of that increase is next year. The second and third year, the increases are far more modest, at 700 million and 600 million, with 1.7 billion in the first year. It has taken some time to work through this, and even the organisations that specialise at this have taken a bit of time to get to grips with the settlement. There have been an awful lot of changes in it around a lot of grant streams that wouldn't normally feature in the settlement. So 18 grants that we currently get as a sector have been added into the fair funding assessment and are now part of the overall figures we're going to be looking at. That is not extra money, it's simply money moving from one pot to another pot. 16 grants have been merged into 4 new grant streams worth £13.2 billion. And again, the only extra money in here is 870 million. So across all of that money that's moving around, 35 billion and another 13 billion, 870 million is the actual additional money in the system. The rest of it is the existing money being moved around. And as you'll know from the previous discussions we've had, the government have implemented fair funding review for next year from April. And to support that change programme, they've introduced some dampening grants to offset some of the losses that some councils face as a result of those changes. And that figure actually increases as we get further into the 3-year settlement period, which is quite interesting when you think councils would move nearer their correct position as time moves on, but the actual cost of dampening goes up. And the 600 million recovery grant, which was paid this year for the first time to just over 100 councils who have high levels of deprivation as a one-off grant, is going to continue for the full life of this spending settlement. So it will continue for the next 3 years. We don't receive that grant. Moving on to the next slide. The consultation is extremely short. In fact, it's already closed. It was a 4-week consultation period. It closed on the 14th of January. And it was quite clear from MHCLG briefings on the settlement that changes in the final settlement are not very likely. If they are going to be any, they're unlikely to be anything very significant. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that so much work has gone into getting to this point. And the areas perhaps where there are some areas of genuine dispute in terms of the approach taken, I think ministerial judgment has been used to arrive at some of those decisions. So it's unlikely those sorts of decisions will get changed. The other point to note, of course, is that we often have seen in settlements in previous years some tweaks in the final settlement when it gets announced. Within the overall package, there is only 50 million across the whole country in contingency at government level. That is a very, very small pot of money. So there isn't much to play with if the government are going to make changes in the final settlement. And I guess the final thing on that, of course, is that the deadline for those councils applying for exceptional financial support has already passed. So again, if they start moving the money around and cutting and dicing the cake differently, that could create problems in terms of councils that may find themselves in a very different place. The settlement itself did not provide any further information on the potential implementation of rent convergence for the HRA, or any information on whether the government will extend the preferential borrowing rate for the HRA beyond March this year. So one has to assume that at this stage it won't be extended. And we are still waiting to hear from government on whether rent convergence will come forward and if so, on what timing and what that will look like. So again, we're no further forward on that at this stage. One of the big surprises in the provisional settlement, however, was actually on schools financing. We previously advised this committee, we'd been advised by the Department for Education to assume a 3% increase in funding next year. In the settlement, we've ended up with no increase, and that's a national position. That's not just for Milton Keynes. So there is no provision for any inflation increases on salaries, national pay awards, or contract inflation on the high needs block. That has created a pressure for everybody. Those with deficits have now got bigger deficits, and it also means that we will move into a small deficit position in 26-27. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. This year, we had 30 councils applying for exceptional financial support. We know that number will be larger, although we don't expect it to be that much higher than it is this year. And that's as a result of a lot of the measures that are in the settlement to try and mitigate that from happening. I'm just going to go back to where I started, I guess, really. So core spending power is something that is often quoted around, and it can confuse how people look at the settlement. As I mentioned before, core spending power is a definition that's used by government to give a view as to what the overall funding for councils looks like. It includes government funding, it includes council tax, and it also includes locally retained share of business rates. And it's effectively the core funding that councils get or have the opportunity to raise locally, which they may or may not choose to do, to run local services. So it does not include all government grants, particularly grants where we just passport the funding on to other bodies, or we have to basically spend that money, like the Household Support Fund, where we're literally paying that out to support people. That's not part of our core budget funding. So some funding sits outside. As do some ring fence grants still. So dedicated schools grant, which I've already mentioned, that still sits outside, as the public health grant and the Better Care Fund, so as well as capital grants. So it's important to understand the distinction that core spending power does not include all grants. It includes certain grants and council tax and business rates. So just turning now to the numbers. So this slide is looking at the position across the country, not in Milton Keynes, and it shows you the overall funding position in the settlement for the current year 25-26 and for each of the following 3 years. And you'll see at the top row there the amount of council tax. So that's 38 billion in the first year, rising to nearly 47 billion by the end of the 3-year settlement period. So you can see how rapidly that level of funding is expected to increase. The government are assuming that for councils who do not have a special dispensation, they will raise council tax up to the referendum limit, which for us is 4.99%. There are some councils who have been given a special dispensation next year, who are the worst affected from the Fair Funding Review, and there are 6 councils who are allowed to increase beyond 4.99 and have been given permission to raise by £150 on a band D. So that will be a slightly different percentage in each of those councils. So they've got a bigger amount they could go for should they wish to do that. And the government have assumed that they will take that increase and implement it in these numbers. So there's a very big expectation around council tax increases built in. You can there see the funding that's going into the Fair Funding Review on the next row. There's then a whole series of rolled-in grants and other funding streams that move around in that year. And you'll see about 2/3 of the way down the total core spending power at national level, starting at 73.5 billion in the current year, rising to 84.7 billion by the end of the 3-year period. Outside of core spending power, three of the new grant streams, 2 of them sit exclusively outside and 1 of them sits partly in and partly out of core spending power. And again, you can see there's quite significant funding there, which makes up the total resources. But those bottom 3 rows do not sit within core spending power. To put this into context on this next slide, these percentages represent the change in core spending power over the life of the settlement. And you will see by type of authority, starting within the inner London boroughs, who only get a 5.2% increase, but the worst affected in the middle are the Shire districts, who get the smallest increase of 3.3. Bearing in mind, this includes council tax increases. So increases at that level actually mean they're not receiving grant increases on average. They're receiving a reduction. And you can see there unitary councils is the red bar, which on average across the country for unitaries is just over 17%, which is slightly above the England average of 15.3%. The big winners are outer London boroughs on the second bar, 23.7%, and metropolitan councils. They are the biggest winners in the new fair funding review system, but you can see quite a wide distribution there between councils. And it's probably also worth saying that the range within categories of authorities is quite wide in terms of those that get the worst settlement to those that have done the best, particularly with categories like shire districts. And that's mainly a component fact to do with business rates income. In terms of what this means for Milton Keynes, again, this is looking over 3 years. You can see here there's some local comparators, and you can see in the green bar, which is the first bar in each of those 3 sections, the position on Milton Keynes. This is a change in core spending power each year, the increase. It includes council tax as well as grant. So in 26-27, we will get an overall increase of 8%, rising to 15.6% by the second year and 23.6% by the third year. So above the 17.1% average for unitaries. So we have done better than the average position of unitary councils. There's some comparator councils on there for local reference. You'll see the big winner stands out quite significantly, and that's Luton, who've done very well. In fact, they're the biggest gainer from the system actually in terms of unitary. And you can see some of the other neighbouring councils in this area and how they fared in general. So overall, Milton Keynes has done well, but Luton is clearly the council that's done the best. And you can see the comparative movements in the other councils, some with fairly modest increases in there as well. I think I mentioned about council tax and its importance in terms of core spending power and how big a component that was. These next few graphs really just try to illustrate this over the period of time of this spending settlement. So starting in 25-26, you'll see that nationally, the overall funding package was 73.5 billion and rises to 84.7 billion. The line on there is an indication of the percentage of that funding that's generated through council tax income in total. So you'll see there across England over that period that council tax by the end of the settlement period has gone from about 52.5% up to nearly 55.5%. What that basically means is there's an increasing reliance on council tax as opposed to grant to enable core spending power to increase. For Milton Keynes, you will see we follow a very similar pattern to that, as you'd expect. So you will see that line going up over that 5-year period and reaching a little bit more than the national average. So we're about 58.7% of our core spending power is derived through increased council tax income as opposed to direct government grant. And what's driving that is really shown in this next slide. You can see the total core spending power for Milton Keynes in each of the 3 years of the settlement period, and the increase each year and the split of that. So these add up to 100%. But what you will see there clearly is each year there is an ever increasing reliance that council tax does most of the heavy lifting. So in the first year where the grant was much bigger, the amount of council tax making up core spending power is lower because there's a bigger injection of grant funding. As that grant funding injection reduces, so does the council tax percentage reliance increase as the total quantum of that increase in that year. So by the end of that 3 years, we're not far off 74% of our increased core spending power coming through council tax assumed increases. In terms of our budgets, this next slide just gives you a little bit of a timeline, I guess, of how our assumptions have changed as we've been going through the budget cycle. So what you'll see in the second column is our published 25-26 budget position, what position we projected back for the draft budget, which was published in December, what's in the provisional settlement that's come out just recently, and then the difference between the draft budget and the provisional settlement. And you'll see an awful lot of numbers moving around. I think the really important one here is the one that says total core spending power in bold. And you'll see on the far right hand side that we have generated an extra 2.2 million. So compared to the published draft budget we looked at last time, we have got an extra 2.2 million pounds next year than we had expected when we looked at this at the draft budget stage. Below core spending power are the grants that sit outside of core spending. And you can see we've gained 2.1 million more than we projected. Big movements there, particularly on the crisis and resilience funding. All of that money is just paid out. It's not money we keep to run services with. This is money we passport on to help people. And again, that's the nature of those grants. So that doesn't directly benefit the overall budget the council setting, but it's part of what we spend. So overall, trying to give you the rounded picture of, so what has fair funding delivered for Milton Keynes? What you'll see on this next slide is what the core funding was in the current year and how that's changed next year. And overall, you'll see we've had a £9.9 million increase. And if you were to look at that from an inflation point of view and a real terms increase, we've split that between the inflation rate in September and how much extra received over and above that. And you can sort of see the overall benefit that we've derived from that in terms of all the swings and roundabouts of all the different grant changes that we've seen. So that's just looking at the core spending power side of things. So I'll just stop there. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour of the provisional settlement. It's probably worth saying at this stage that we expect to get the final settlement on the 9th of February. That may, of course, change, but that is the date we are currently expecting to receive that.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly?
Is there any impact from changes to business rates announced since the settlement?
Yeah, so there's been there is an awful lot happening on business rates with council funding. The whole system is being reset, and because we've also got a revaluation year happening at the same time, and the government have also taken decisions to change how business rates is charged for a lot of businesses. So there are now 5 multipliers, not 2 multipliers. So the way that business rates is calculated for a lot of businesses will change. They'll be using a different multiplier. They'll have a brand new rateable value from April this year, sorry, as a result of the revaluation. So there are a lot of changes for businesses coming in. Some of the reliefs have obviously been removed as well. The knock-on impact for the council in terms of its budget is all of that has to then be factored into how much business rates we end up keeping. What the government have decided to do for councils in the first year of that change, because there is so much change going on, there's something called a safety net. So in the provisional settlement, every council is given an amount of money it's allowed to keep from its business rates. And we're guaranteed we can't get less than that figure. So the safety net's been set at 100%. So we are guaranteed to receive our baseline funding position. As we go into future years, that percentage reduces and we could lose funding in future years as that percentage is lowered back towards where it is currently at 92.5%. So there is a change there. The government are also implementing new reliefs, and obviously one was announced very recently around pubs. We expect to receive compensation for that because obviously by paying that relief out, that reduces the income that we will collect, and we will expect to receive something called a Section 31 grant in lieu of that income. It's quite a complicated process in terms of how it's all calculated, but ultimately we shouldn't lose out as a result of that change.
Any other questions in the room? Councillor Soden?
Yeah, still on business rates. This is quite a small question. I was just wondering, looking at, like, I don't know what slide it is, the side where you basically break down budget, draft budget, provisional settlement, why there was such a big difference between, is it because they're assuming 100% and they're not factoring in the changes that they're going to make eventually in terms of what we drafted, what we had as our draft budget versus what they've given us in the provisional settlement?
Yeah, so I guess just taking you through from left to right on there. So the change from the draft, from the published budget of 81 million dropping to 53 million, the main reason for that reduction at that time was the expectation of our 100% business rates reset. So that was factoring in the fact we'd lose all of the growth that we had accumulated since 2013-14 was the main reason for that movement. The figure we used in the draft budget was modelled by Pixel, and obviously they were moving money around. It's quite a complex set of spreadsheets in terms of how much money would be paid directly through revenue support grant as opposed to business rates. And you'll see that both numbers were out by a not dissimilar amount in terms of the movements either way. So there is actually a big movement between draft budget and provisional settlement. If you look at the two combined and add them up, the difference isn't that significant. But so it was to do a factor of how they've modelled the different quantums between grant and business rates.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. I think you mentioned about pubs relief for the business rate. Is it for the hospitality or just for the pubs?
I'm not sure that it extends as far as hospitality and other industries at this moment. It certainly was announced specifically for pubs, but as far as I know, it's limited to that. But
just because they didn't ban.
Just one more. Thank you, Peter. One more. You mentioned about that we're allowed to keep a percentage of the business rate. Do you have the figure? What percentage are we allowed to keep for the next years until it's been settled down?
I think the answer to that is probably it depends. So the way that it works is in the settlement, we are allowed to keep something called the part of fair funding that we get is paid through business rates. And our baseline funding position is the amount of money that we're assumed to keep. But we only get to keep that money if we generate at least a certain amount of business rates income. So the government have assumed for each council how much business rates income we will generate. As long as we generate as that much, we get to keep the business rates funding, baseline funding. We can keep more if we grow our business rates income. So if our business rates increases over the life of the 3 years, we get to keep a percentage of the growth. I'm not quite sure of that percentage because it's changed again under the new system, hasn't it? A lot, and it's got more complicated because of the number of new multipliers that have come in. But typically speaking, under the current system, we keep about 30% roughly of business rates growth. The rest of it goes back to the Treasury, who then redistribute that back to other councils. But all of the income in the business rate system gets redistributed back into local government. And one of the reasons the RSG figure has gone up by so much is that all of the growth from 2013-14 all the way up to the end of 25-26 has been taken out of the business rate system and redistributed back through RSG. And that's just a factor of that the reset was taken so long to take place. So for the 3 years going forward, we potentially could benefit from growth. The downside risk is if we don't generate enough income to achieve the assumed income that government expects us to get, we will actually get penalised, as would any other council. So there's a sort of stick and carrot approach to it.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Okay. Is there another chunk of the presentation? Back to you.
We've obviously now been working on the draft budget and moving on now to our final budget. As I mentioned previously, we have gained an extra £2.2 million in grant funding from the draft budget assumptions that we made to what is currently in the provisional settlement. Over the 3-year period of the settlement, we're £5.5 million better off by the 3rd year. So it improves as you get further into the settlement period compared to the assumptions we had in the draft budget. What this means for next year's budget in 2026-27 is that the savings target that was included in the draft budget of 7.3 million is now 5 million. So the level of savings needed has reduced since we published the draft budget. We're publishing the final budget papers next week. And obviously, as you'll be aware, that Cabinet meet on the 3rd of February to consider that report, and it goes to full council on the 18th of February. And the final settlement will come, we believe, on the 9th of February from what we've been told, which is obviously inconveniently sandwiched between the Cabinet meeting and the council meeting. And just to give you a flavour of where we are in terms of our overall medium-term financial plan position, you'll see at the top of this table where we thought we were going to be when we presented the draft budget and the gap in each of those years. And you'll see some movements since the draft budget was published. Big one being around the provisional settlement and the gains that we've made, which come to about 5.5 million over that period of time. And then there are some other changes we've made. And you'll see in there that next year's budget, as things stand, with director saving of almost 5 million balances. And you can then see the gap each year and the cumulative gap at the bottom of that slide, which come to about 14.2 million by the end of 29-30, although the settlement only goes to 2028 to 2029. But we always do a 4-year medium-term financial forecast. We'll be coming on to savings in a moment, but just as a flavour as the split. So the savings that we published on the 12th of January come to that £5 million savings gap. And within that, this pie chart just shows you the broad split of where those savings fall between staffing reductions and other types of changes. Very small bit of extra income, funding changes, and a little bit around contract spend as well. So about 60% of the savings are directly related to staffing, and the other 40%, as you can see, is split as shown on that slide. And overall, there are about 50 roles impacted by the saving proposals. Within the budget, we were asked, I think it was the meeting before last, I think around contingency. You will see when you get to see the budget report, we obviously always have a contingency position in the general fund budget. And you can see there what that is looking like at this moment in time in terms of how that contingency position looks. So that leaves us with a reasonable level of contingency to manage risks and also specifically deal with some of the uncertainty, although I think it is a reducing uncertainty around children's social care, external residential placements. I mentioned at the start about schools budgets, and the thing that I think surprised everybody was the fact that the government have decided to freeze the formula for the high needs block. And in effect, what that means is there is no increase in funding. So although our funding appears to go up in DSG, all that's happened is they've moved other grants that we get and they've added it to the existing DSG grant. The overall funding hasn't actually changed though. What that means, of course, is that the normal cost pressures we see in the high needs block around inflation and contract prices now have no new funding coming in to meet those costs. When we set the draft budget, we had balanced the high needs block, and we still had some money held back, having done that, into 2026-27. The impact of this announcement, however, means that headroom has now been completely removed, and we've got about a £700,000 gap as things stand. When you see the budget report, we talk a lot in there about this issue. It's a national issue. Nationally, there is about a £6 billion deficit on the high needs block across all councils. 2 in 3 councils are already in deficit. And we, along with quite a number of other councils, will be going into that sort of space next financial year. We are waiting for a white paper to be published by the government. We had expected it last year. We understand it will be coming out very soon, which is likely to see some reforms to the way that special educational needs is managed going forward, partly in terms of meeting need, but also dealing with the financial pressures that the system is generating since the changes came in 2014. We also expect in the final local government finance settlement an announcement around debt buyout. So there are a lot of councils who've got very large deficits on their balance sheet, which they are effectively by law told to ignore. So we don't follow normal accounting practice. We just ignore those deficits as though they're not there, although in reality they are there. And the government are coming up with some proposals about what to do with those deficits. And they're going to do that in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to deal with existing deficits, which does not impact us because we haven't got a deficit. And there will be a second buyout when the override ends in 2028, which we probably will be impacted by then. I would expect us to be in deficit at that point, about how they're going to deal with that, because the reforms they're going to bring in will take a number of years to take effect. So there's going to be a lot more coming out in the coming weeks on this as we go through the budget process.
Thank you very much. Any further questions on the second part of that presentation in the room? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. We will now move on to... Oh, sorry. Yeah, fine. The committee is asked to note the report. Any recommendations before we do that? No. Do we note the report? We do. Cool. Thank you very much. Item 7 is the draft council budget 26-27. The next item is to receive a schedule which outlines the director identified savings which form part of the draft council budget 26-27. Following receipt of the provisional settlement, the savings needed for this line of the budget have reduced from 7.3 million to 4.993 million, or shall we call it 5? And the schedule outlines how this is planned to be achieved. As members of the committee will note, many of these savings relate to staffing, and therefore we may need to move into private session if we wish to discuss these in detail. Officers will indicate if this is the case. Our role tonight as scrutineers is to consider the deliverability and potential service impact of the proposed savings. Any proposed staffing arrangements within the agreed budget are a matter for the relevant director to decide upon and will be subject to due HR processes and consultation. If we have any questions this evening that cannot be immediately answered by the scrutiny officer, cannot be immediately answered, the scrutiny officer will undertake to get responses for our next meeting on the 27th of January. I'm aware that a number of questions were submitted in advance, which was very helpful. I will first suggest that officers briefly introduce the schedule and provide some context before we deal with questions and discuss the item.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yes, what you have before you is the published list of proposals that directors have come up with to address the budget gap that we've got, which, as you've mentioned, is about £5 million next year. As I mentioned before, about 60% of the savings in here are directly related to staff roles, a number of which are vacant roles, as you'll have picked up when you've gone through the schedule. Some of those are not vacant roles, and there will be a series of HR business cases developed by directors to implement these savings, and that work is already sort of being prepped at the moment in order to get the savings delivered on a timely basis. So as you'll appreciate, that's quite a sensitive time. It does affect quite a large number of roles, although it is spread across the whole organisation. There are some other savings in there as well that are not staff related. One income proposal around planning and a number of other proposals that impact the way that we are utilising grant funding, and a smaller number of proposals impacting contracts or supplies and services budgets. But the majority, as I say, are staff related or are to do with the way we're using grants in slightly different ways to how we've done it before, as a result of receiving some additional grant funding, particularly in children's social care. So as I say, the next step in terms of delivering these savings will be staff consultation, as you referenced in your introduction. And those consultation processes will include the opportunity for staff in those affected areas to feed back on the proposals that directors are putting in front of them. And that may potentially lead to changes as well as we go through that process. But again, that is the normal order of how things are done and how we normally reorganise things. So, as I say, I think we had some helpful questions from one councillor on the committee, which we'll pick up. But it's probably easier to go through each director at a time. I suspect it's probably the easiest way to manage it, if that's okay.
Yes, agreed. So if we go through, to keep us all sane, on the A3 sheet that hopefully we're all looking at, if we just go through section by section and try not to drift into other areas, I'm sure we will at some point, but if we do our best to stick to each one at a time. So if we kick off with adult services, I can't remember if any of your questions were on adult services. I'm sure they were. You went bottom to top, did you? Naturally. Fine. So in that case, I will just open to the floor for questions on adult services, if there are any. You might as well go.
Okay. Firstly, can I ask one that's global to the whole proposal? How is everything green when there's an awful lot of consultation around HR stuff? How can we be confident that every single one of these is going to be able to be delivered? Because I've never seen something like this with so many roles up for deletion and it all be green. How is it all green?
So the RAG rating you're referring to on these saving proposals has been set by the relevant director. And the basis of that RAG rating is about deliverability of the saving. And in the view of that director, that's how they assess in terms of confidence of getting that saving delivered. So a lot of the roles are vacant roles. So the saving effectively is already achieved so long as we don't reappoint into the role. For those roles which are currently occupied with a post holder, the director will have taken alongside their management team a view on the deliverability of that saving and their confidence with it. So it's basically a confidence rating of how they feel about that proposal.
In the 1, 2, 4th line, so changes to supported living commissioning arrangements. That's supposed to save us £200,000. How is that going to work? There's not post, so that's obviously a direct cut. How is that going to work and not impact on people? So just a bit more information, please.
So this saving is more around the contract management of those arrangements and those commissioning arrangements. So they'll be looking at the level of care that's being commissioned and whether that's appropriate to be delivered. The voids, looking at the voids rate and whether that can be reduced, making sure that we're not paying for care that's not being received. Also challenging providers when they're submitting their costings about ensuring that that is fully going to care delivery. Optimising the use of shared care as well, so it's not necessarily don't need a requirement for one-to-one care, looking at shared care as well. And then the use of the one-to-one, is that actually proactive and productive? So again, just taking a whole review of, instead of defaulting to that, is that actually what that person needs, and is that the value for money?
Just say that's really, really helpful. There's a whole bunch of things been tied up in there. Some of the efficiencies you talk about working better, great, fantastic. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing that we need to be doing as a council, work better, because, you know, in effect, that saves everybody money and probably delivers better for residents or for service users. That's fine. Some of that stuff, however, didn't sound that it was that well advanced. So I still come back to the green rating. How can we have a green rating when things aren't that far advanced with it? That worries me, Chair, is that it's great, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to deliver that. So it just concerns me slightly. It might not be able to be delivered.
Thank you. Just 1 second before I come to you, Councillor Long. I think to save it coming up over and over again, I do think it would be a fair recommendation at the end to say, as we iterate this to another version, can we have the next level of detail against some of these things? I don't know whether that's a ask for the finance team or whether that's a ask for the directors, probably the directors, just to do. We could have 2 or 3 sentences next to each of them that kind of say. So I think that's a fair recommendation, so that we don't have to repeat ourselves throughout. And just to comment on your broader point about the delivery risk, I had the same thought as Councillor Geary when I read through it. Narrowly, delivery risk, can these things be easily delivered? I can see how they might all be green, but there's just beyond that, like an impact risk or something like that, that says, well, yes, you might be able to remove these roles, fairly easy to do, but how do we manage the impact of removing those roles, which might be more of an amber or something, you know, I don't know, and need a slightly different consideration. I don't know if that's a recommendation or just a sort of informal suggestion, but it might be just something to think about, whether there's another RAG column, one's delivery and one's some sort of impact or something. I'm not sure if that's a formal recommendation, but at least say it out loud. And then I will shut up. Councillor Long.
Chair, as we got into this, and particularly this item, I think I probably have a conflict of interest in that my daughter is a senior manager in one of the main providers of commissioned supported living services in the city. So I just better declare that.
Thank you. Councillor Cannon.
Yeah, again, it's a more general point. How are these savings going to be monitored over the year, and when will we know that they're not meeting target?
So what we do with budgets in terms of savings every year, and this won't be an exception to that, all of these will be tracked individually throughout the whole financial monitoring process. So we'll know whether these are being progressed in terms of have they been implemented, not implemented, and what the financial impact of that change has been. Some of these are obviously quite black and white. We've either we've either deleted a role or we've made that change, or we haven't. Some like the one you've just been discussing is a bit more nuanced in terms of tracking the savings in all of the budgets that Sonia was referencing in that explanation she just gave you. So for most of these, they're quite simple to track, some slightly more complicated, but that will all be monitored throughout the year.
And another general point is that as a number of these are not currently filled, these roles, I imagine that the different directorates have been making savings during the current financial year and actually spending the money on something else. And are there kind of subsequent knock-on effects of those that they've been putting to other expenditure items that were going to hit us?
I don't think that's the case for the vast majorities. And I say that because when you look at the Q3 budget monitoring report, when we publish it again next week to Cabinet, you will see a very large overspend on children's placements, which you're aware of on that budget. And what you will see across all the other budgets is underspending, which is being used to offset the overspend. So rather than using the underspends and spending on something else, as you've sort of suggested, we've actually not spent that money, and we've used it to mitigate the pressure in children's services in year. So some of these will be some of those items of expenditure where we've not made those decisions, such as replacing vacant posts, for example, and those posts are now being offered up as a permanent reduction rather than a temporary reduction to mitigate the overspend.
Cool, thank you. Any final questions on adult services? Right, we will move to children's services. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. 2 points. Line 5, the reconfigure our family centre provision alongside the family first expectations. Are we talking about moving families first into the family centres? Because my understanding is they're separate buildings at the moment. And then line 8, utilise additional bedroom at Westminster House to reduce external placement spend. What sort of timescale would we be looking at that? Because if you've got a residential home that's going to an extra bedroom, you'd have to go through Ofsted, I'd have thought, to gain that place. Thank you.
Yeah, so just coming back to your first point, so the reconfigure of the family centre provision alongside the family's first expectations. So this is in relation to the new funding that we're receiving to support with Best Start family hubs. So in Milton Keynes, we've been fortunate, we've kept our funding for our children's centres and family centres. That's been quite a priority in terms of prevention and early intervention, where you will find other authorities have reduced that spend because it's deemed to be discretionary service. We've kept that, so it's now, because we've got the extra grant coming in next year, we're substituting some of the general fund expenditure and funding it from the grant funding instead. We're not giving it all up, because some of the new grant comes with some new burdens and additional responsibilities, so we've balanced that and we've gone through the grant guidance to make sure that we can meet those additional burdens from the grant funding regulations and continue to provide the services. And second point on Westminster Home I believe, can already take extra children. I don't know if it's registered for 6 or 8. We've only had 5 placed in there. We've only had staffing capacity to take 5 children. So again, similar to the previous saving, this allows for an extra staff to be able to accommodate the extra child going in there. The building provision itself can already accommodate an extra child. It's just the staffing. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Geary.
Thank you. Once again, quite a lot of questions on here. Starting on the first line, so include our supported employment service in the National Connect to Work programme. I'm assuming that's merely moving it from one place to another place. So do we have £175,000 hit somewhere else?
So we claim a grant for Connect to Work as part of a DWP strategy, and in the grant funding that we'll claim for future years, we'll claim for these staff as well. So instead of funding them from our general fund, we'll claim for them as part of the grant, which was included in our original bid.
So it's not actually a reduction; it's just a million moving of a issue. Okay, thank you. Next one's fine. Education outcome service to be a fully traded service to schools. We've got the demand for that firstly, and secondly, should there therefore not be an income stream because we're just fetching it back into this resource from the DSG, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so we actually sell this service to schools. So we went to a traded service. This is the second year of that traded service. So when we had the schools improvement and brokerage grant removed from us by government a couple of years ago, the intention was to trade this service to schools, and that's how a lot of our other local authorities continued to deliver their school improvement service. We didn't go full hog in terms of 100% full cost recovery from schools, and that's where we'll be moving to next year to have that full cost recovery. It went to schools forum previously in the year, and we'll also talk at our quadrant meetings with schools. So we know that there is a high.
In that third column, that should change to income then, as opposed to a reduction. It's not a reduction, it's an income.
It's a reduction in our general, it's a reduction in our general fund budget commitment, but yeah, it'll be generated by income. Yeah.
Okay. Except the next one's fine. And the point about reconfigure our family centres, I've got that one too. Next one, safeguarding team restructure in line with the children's social care reform agenda. Just a little bit more information on that one, please.
Shall I?
Just to double check with that one, because as it relates to a restructure, I'm not sure quite how much detail we're going into and whether we might need to resolve to exclude the public. So
Happy to do that, but just edit the tape.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure that we've done the formal resolution if we do need to.
Agreed.
So I don't know, Sonia, whether you know. Okay.
Can we resolve to exclude the answer to that question?
Yeah, and the speech and language intervention package provided from the Youth Justice Service. Shorter means not getting rid of, but it means that we're not going to do as much, I am assuming. How are we therefore saving the 180,000? There's no roles there. Is that a commission service that we're just not going to do as much of, and what will be the impact on that on the front line?
So we did ask Mac for a response on this because it was helpfully one of the questions that was put forward first. So at the moment, all new referrals are screened and assessed to consider their speech, communication and language needs. So through the SEND reorganisation that's now come in, they've strengthened their response in this area to ensure that when a need is identified, this will be referred onto the correct service as opposed to being supported from the Youth Justice Service. So it's almost cutting out, it's making the process more straightforward and less points to go to. It'll be going direct to the service.
Which service?
Whichever relevant service it is. So this will reduce the longevity of the speech and language provision currently delivered within the Youth Justice Service and return the core activity to the NHS.
Right, so it's outside of the control of this council, but it will have an impact on their budgets, or people won't have the service delivered at all.
Well, the outcomes will be closely monitored to consider any impact, and any concerns will be raised with health accordingly.
Okay, Cheryl, I just think that's something we need to be sort of keep an eye on, because it sounds to me like if they're not expecting that extra work to be coming their way, you could find out that that service just isn't being delivered. I'm not an expert on it, but that to me shows that if it's not delivered early enough, that can have big knock-ons later. So it's just something we need to be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room wanted to come in on children's? No, okay, thank you. That was pretty comprehensive. Finance and resources. This should be a nice, easy one for the room. Anybody waiting to come in on finance and resources? Just look around and see if anybody else wants to. We'll start with you, Councillor Geary.
On the first one, it'd be really, I mean, I'm not really talking about the 5 posts being deleted there. It's more about the work that goes on with there. So reduction in, firstly, at least there's more than a couple of sentences. There's a couple of sentences which helps. Some of the high volume transactional tasks supported a simplified reporting structure, except there's something else there on MKWRP, which probably would have helped if that had been a separate line. But those tasks, I'm assuming, have a role which is important that they're done. Am I correct on that, or is it not true? Yeah. No problem.
Yes, so it's probably helpful to, sorry,
I was just going to say, just for the purposes of making sure we follow the correct procedure, I think what might be helpful is if we resolve a blanket exclusion that we will remove anything that is exempt.
Yes.
And therefore we can have a free flowing conversation and we're not going
Just
in and out.
fine with that. Is that so agreed?
Agreed.
There you go.
One, I'm not overly worried about how that's coming there, but I think we do need to be aware that the tariff is a source of income to this council, but it also has to deliver for a lot of, there's a lot of liabilities this council has to deliver with tariff, and we've seen tariff used quite a lot in certain areas. MKE for the overspends there, etc. We're seeing it used here. It's a small amount here, but I do think we have to be aware that if we use it too much, in 10 years' time, we're going to find an awful lot of stuff that needs to be delivered, and there will be no source of funding to do it because we will have spent it all on various things we're recharging to it. So it's just something to keep an eye on, that we need to be aware of that, what we're spending. And it would be useful to understand at some point how much of tariff has been drawn out to do these standard things, that all these run-of-the-mill things that used to be funded through the general fund. Next one I'm really looking at is internal audit. That's 5. I think I put this in there. Now, I accept 2 roles leaving and the saving that's there, which is a relatively small amount, because I'm assuming the remainder of that is to pay for the service. Now, I can understand how sometimes outsourcing stuff saves this council money. My experience of auditors, who are in effect accountants, is they don't do anything for less than £1,000. And in effect, I really, really do want to see a very strong business case on how the heck we save money by going to a professional firm of auditors, because you ain't going to get a lot of work out of it for the amount of money that we're probably saving. It just worries me that we're not actually going to really save money. It's great to say we'll do it by outsourcing it to something, but those people have a very big charge out rate. They make a significant profit, and they have offices with very plush carpets and very smart offices and all the other things that go with it, which comes with significant overheads. How the heck are we going to save money?
I think it's a fair point. It's not for me to reply to. I will say, in my experience, internal audit significantly less lucrative than external audit and the attached services. So can imagine it's not the internal auditors in those firms bringing in the money and the nice carpets. But Steve, do you want to comment on any of that?
I think just to try and help a little bit with that. So I think the direct correlation being made is understandable from what's presented on the paper, but it's not quite as correlated as that might suggest. So the use of using an external company to deliver part of the audit plan, internal audit plan that is to do with the skill set they've got. They've got particular skill sets that we don't necessarily have internal. We have quite a small internal audit team at Milton Keynes. And when we do more sophisticated audits around computer audit and things like that, it makes sense to buy that resource in. We don't do lots and lots of different types of audits. So to have that mix of skills, it makes sense to use a mixed economy approach. That's the sort of link between the use of outsourcing. It's not because it's cheaper, just to be clear. This is within an overall budget envelope within audit that saving's been effectively achieved. Why it's 40,000, so it's not quite as has been suggested, but I can understand that. So we're not suggesting for one moment we're going to outsource things and save a whole pile of money. That's not what we're doing. It's about the type of audit work that we want to do.
Okay.
Thank you. The bottom one, I'm happy with the response. Thank you. The bottom one, revenues and benefits, systems consolidation, except you're deleting vacant posts. My experience of Revs and Bens is they're a good team, but if we're, if it thins out too much, they won't be able to deliver. I'm just looking for the confidence that this is actually going to. It's number one, it's green again. It's a significant change. How big is the team now? How much is it shrinking by? And why are we so confident that the work is going to be done? The easiest thing to do when you're planning this is to say, well, we'll just get rid of a few people, or we'll delete a few posts, and we'll just have to work a bit harder. It's very easy to do that when you're sitting around a table with a sheet of paper in front of you. It's a heck of a lot different when you're 9 months in and there's a whole heap of stuff that just has not been done. And I'll be coming back to that on some of the other service area if we get to further down. What confidence can we have that how big's the team, how much are we losing, how all of the things there, and if it needs to be deleted from the recording.
Impacted by the proposal.
Thank you. Any other comments for finance and resources? No. Okay, thank you. We will now move into total customer and community services. Would anybody like to ask a question? I think it's you. Go on, Councillor Geary.
I accept the first one, vacant leisure and community roles. The next one, I put a written question in, so we don't have to delete too much out of the tape. If you could just tell me whether I am correct, that would be really helpful. Removal of vacant financial investigator role and commission the work externally. What does this financial investigator role do? And is it going to actually, I mean, are we going to be able to do it effectively from outside? Are we going to actually make a saving from doing it outside? Is it something that is necessary to be done? If it isn't done properly, what's the risk of where we lose on the other end coming back? That's not good for a start.
So in terms of your first question about management, no, you were incorrect on that assumption. For the financial investigator, this role is currently vacant. What it would do is the saving does generate income if it, or the post, if there was a, it's in here. The post would generate income if it takes any cases to court and achieves it and investigates any investigations. So the cost of the post, if we do need to pay anything, will come from any income generated from it. That POCA income is ring fenced, and it's a statutory ring fenced budget that we can't budget for an income target from proceeds of crime. So that would be something that we would fund from those savings if we need to do anything.
Fine. Councillor Geary, does that cover your questions on that area, customer and community? Is anybody else waiting for a customer? I will just say that is, of all of the sections, that's the one where a little bit of extra detail would be quite nice, because they're fairly short. And we should probably say in the same breath, the level of detail in the finance and resources section was above and beyond all of the other areas. So thank you. That's now formally noted. Planning and placemaking. Would anybody like to ask a question on planning and placemaking? No. Councillor Geary, would you like to ask?
I would. If I look in the middle one, which is reduction in hours, I understand that's fairly good because, you know, someone who works 5 days a week is now only going to be working 3 days a week or something along those lines. How many of the other roles that are going out of this whole list are people dropping hours out of you know, so instead of one person actually being made redundant, we're actually just seeing that, you know, people are going to 4 days a week, not 5. So how many of those is that happening to quite a lot of areas, or is it merely just, I mean, it's not bad, it's a great way of working if people are happy to have a little bit more time doing something else, and you know, potentially if things improve in a year or two's time, then they can come back up. But it'd be useful to know what's going on if that is the case.
I'm not aware specifically of any other posts within this list. However, it is one of the work streams that we're working on as part of the Change Because We Have To programme, and that is something we have been investigating around reducing hours and asking staff what their views are on whether they would like to be reducing their hours to work less and make savings in the future.
Right, so that'll be coming.
Yeah.
Next year's budget, not this one. And the next one is increase in planning income. Is this something that we've already seen an increase in income in this year, so it's pretty well baked in, or is this something that we're expecting that to come through? And if we're expecting it to come through, what confidence can we have? Is there that we know there's 3 or 4 large planning applications that are coming in that are going to give us this amount of money, or how do we know that we're going to get this money?
It is a forecast position, so it's not guaranteed. However, we have seen an increase in planning income this financial year. We've built some increase already into the budget, but as we've progressed throughout the year, we've seen that increase continue. So we're anticipating this upturn will continue, and it will continue into 26-27. So it's not certain, but it is based on evidence of what we're seeing at the moment.
Thank you. Anybody else for planning and placemaking? No. Okay. Law and governance. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. I am sure earlier this year we had a presentation where we were going to increase our childcare lawyers due to the amount of work that's been increased. So that worries me that we're now going to remove it when we were less than a year. We were going to increase the childcare team. If we could just have a bit more on that. And then secondly, staffing reductions to democratic services. It's quite a big line. If we could just have a bit more detail on that, please. Thank you.
I haven't got any specific details with me on the childcare one, but I can get more information to give you on that one. In terms of democratic services, it's proposing delivering staff reductions in 2 areas, so both democratic services and executive assistance, which is the business support effective function across democratic services. The anticipated role reduction is about 3 to 4 roles. In democratic services, that proposal reflects efficiencies gained by using new technology such as minute taking and a pooled approach to non-specific tasks. And in executive support, the proposal is to move to a model where executive assistants support more than one senior officer and also use more technology to improve general productivity.
Gary.
Picking up on that point, why do we not have any roles in the 4th column from the end?
That's an error.
It'd be useful if that could be updated, because that is quite important in the overall run of things, where we go with that. Just moving to the next two positions above there. We've seen quite a lot of posts disappear out of legal services in the last few years. I don't know what other councillors have found with any casework they've had to do with the team, but it seems that things are getting slower. I had one of we talk about we've got to get our planning applications through quickly. It was a just a legal document that needed checking. It took 8 weeks for someone to read through a 2-page document and give it a tick, because there isn't enough staff. So when we're taking one of those, I accept it's vacant, but we're not going to improve that position, and that is a fee paid position. We're not going to improve that position, and we are slowing down a lot of the rest of the work. It worries me that some of these savings, the potential savings, will actually have service delivery impacts further down the line. And I've experienced it in what I've seen, and it just worries me that that's going to be the case there. I accept the point about properties and tenants, and I would like, we've done it in a number of areas here where things are being charged back. Properties and tenants, I'm assuming that means HRA, and as a result, it'd be really useful to understand how much is being recharged into the HRA as a global amount, and how that's going to affect the HRA budget, because we've already looked through that budget. So I'm assuming everything extra here comes at, it's a big budget, I accept, and there's quite a lot of play in that budget, but it would be really useful to understand that, so that we're not going to notice 20 bathrooms aren't going to be fixed because we're taking the money out. So that would be useful to understand. But it concerns me, taking more and more lawyer posts out, that we notice service delivery hits, and I just think it needs to be flagged, if people agree with me, in the report, but to do no more than flag.
Yeah, I think it's fair to monitor that obviously there's an extent to which you trust the judgment of the director in the area to say that they'll know what the impact's going to be, but it's fair to flag and for us to monitor. I think that's reasonable. Did any officer want to comment on any of the points?
No, I mean, just in terms of the HRA recharges, we do an exercise across the council where we look at how we do all of the recharges. That position will be reported as part of the final budget, and we look at that comparing to how much the HRA have budgeted for recharges from the general fund. So that will feed in overall. And there will be some of the other savings will therefore impact on the HRA anyway to reduce the savings. So, for example, as you're reducing finance recharges, you're reducing charges to the HRA from the knock-on impact of some of those other savings that you're seeing.
Thank you. Right, I think we are moving into environment and property. If there is anybody chomping at the bit, Councillor Cannon. Comments on environment and property? No. Okay. Thank you very much to the officers for that. I appreciate that. It's quite difficult to get through that without anybody from the director. So appreciate coming and being very prepared with all of those answers. That's really helpful. So the one particular recommendation that I noted, I mean, I'm sure you took it down as we went, but iterating with more detail, with particular reference to impacts on frontline services, to bring in something that you said later. And the other thing which Councillor Geary did mention, please can we have a reference number against each one?
Yep.
Just to make the meeting very slightly easier. It's not a selfish point, but it'd be useful. Other than that, if we're all agreed on that, are we agreed on that? Is that okay? Can somebody second? That's all right. Other than that, can we note the reports and thank the officers for the comments, answers? Thank you.
Can I just put one point to that?
Yeah.
With our recommendations that we actually didn't have to save £2 million out of this budget that we thought we were going to have to meet when we met here in December. This work must have been done significantly in advance of that, because I'm sure you didn't, you know, if you assumed we were going to have to save £7 million, I'm assuming by the beginning, by October, November, December, you were already getting that work out there. It just surprises me it took so long to get this information out. There's no business cases with it and all of those sorts of things, when frankly this work must have been developed months ago. That worries me slightly that it went so long. I understand not wanting to release it until you got the settlement, because there's some stuff that didn't have to be saved this year, but it worries me that it took so long to get that information out and there's so little information behind some of them, because in theory there's £2 million of savings that didn't have to be made this year that people would have worked up as well. But that's just a point I think that needs to be noted.
Thank you. Fine. Okay, moving to item 8. The work programme. The committee's current work programme for 25-26 municipal year is included on pages 17 to 20 of the agenda pack. This work programme remains draft and subject to change. Before I pass to officers, I will just comment on the agenda for our meeting next week. Do any councillors have any further questions relating to the savings that have not been addressed this evening? In which case we can take it away and have responses for the next meeting. I think we covered that, and there were 1 or 2 that we picked up, and we'll come back. Yeah. Fine. I would also ask that should any committee members already have proposals for recommendations to be included in the committee's report, that these be sent through to the scrutiny officer ahead of the next meeting so that they can be circulated to the committee. We will need to discuss these at the next meeting to confirm whether the committee agrees that they should be included in the final report. Do any officers wish to make any comments at this stage on this item? Oh, okay. Sian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, as I'm hoping you are all already aware, since the publication of these papers, the date of the next meeting has been confirmed as the 27th of January. So that is exactly a week from today. I will endeavour to share a draft of the committee's report such that it is ahead of the next meeting, including any recommendations that have been proposed this evening and any further recommendations that are shared with me ahead of the next meeting, to allow the committee to have sufficient time to comment on those.
Thank you. Any other comments from councillors in the room? No. Okay, thank you. There is nothing to formally note or report on this item, so that concludes this evening's business at 8:29.
Can I just confirm, are we adjourning this meeting till next week, or are we having a separate meeting with a separate agenda for next week? It might just be easier just to adjourn this meeting till next week, and it'll save Sian a little bit of work and printing and everything else.
That would have been a possibility. However, due to the timings, I have already had to publish the papers for next week's meeting. So it does count as a separate meeting, and that also allows us to bring the draft report as an agenda item, a substantive agenda item. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.